suspect is known to most of you, or soon will be. It's a great pleasure that you've come to kind of present the project in Berlin. I'd like to welcome Eyal Weizman.
Just before I start, I'm presenting a project which is a partnership between three people: the architect Zvi Hecker from Berlin, the artist Micha Ullman from Israel, and myself. It was very much done kind of in my architectural youth. It's from 1995. Can we have the first slide, perhaps? That is a site of a synagogue in Berlin, Kreuzberg, that was destroyed. A kind of a very specific Berlin phenomena is that because Berlin is built on sand, trees don't grow naturally there. The trees that you see there in Tiergarten, etc., have been planted there. But it kind of after the war, the ruins of red brick buildings were actually fertilizing the ground again. And when you go, and often in Berlin you see like patches of forest, you know that they are built over ruins of buildings. So that is actually was not originally a courtyard, but that was a building, and the trees on it are exactly, well, at the time they were 50 years old. This was the starting point of a competition that we've done and finally won. Can I have the next slide, please? Oh. Uh-huh. Do you know which one? It's my first lecture.
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay, the idea was very simple. What we wanted to do is actually take the history, on the first hand, to avoid representation, and to actually transform the history of the site into a form. So we've taken basically three layers of time. The trees is the destruction, the time of the destruction of the synagogue, the benches from the time of the synagogue, and then what was very, very important, that in courtyards in Berlin you have very specific sort of building codes. We were speaking about it yesterday, and we were orthodoxly drawing the line of the fire truck as it has to go into every Berlin courtyard, kind of taking it directly from the regulation by the angles and by the size, etc., and superimposing all those three layers of time in order to create a shape, the shape of the memorial. So basically, the only thing that we've done is that we've put the benches where they were in the original site, and now kind of within the small forest that grew on the ruins of the synagogue. Right. And create this kind of superimposition of time. Basically, it works for us. It works when we were thinking of a memorial. It works like the process of memory itself. That the past is actually superimposed with the present and create another image. What you see here is is actually the configuration of the benches as they stand now. The line of the fire truck that makes it, and we decided to leave the grass kind of widely growing in between those benches. Where you see a gap in the bench is where originally in the synagogue a column was standing. And slowly, kind of, although when we conceived it, we were trying to avoid metaphors. Metaphor kind of seep into the project, and we took a look at that. I mean, it was before when we actually had the drawing, and it started reminding us of a text, or more particular, of a Talmudic text, where the kind of the gaps in the trees become kind of punctuations within words, and then walking inside the memorial would become reading in a way. So, but what is interesting about a Talmudic text, and that kind of initiated as well our thinking about memory and time, is that it's on a single page in the Talmud. You have text from different periods. You have rabbis from the 4th century, 6th century, 13th century, and 19th century, actually all arguing on the same page. And you have a kind of discussion across time and across space that is contained within that shape. So, and you really feel like there is a discussion across time. And that kind of, this superimposition of time that creates both the typography of the page and the process of how knowledge and how shape is created and how knowledge is accumulated was kind of fed back into the work which we decided to call page. It's kind of a winter image of that. More on white. The idea was very much in the conception of that as well was as a kind of reaction against what I saw at the time as aggression within the way that Jewish memorials or Jewish work in Berlin were conducted. What we wanted to do is to make a place which is not didactic, that does not educate, but that provides, to act through generosity, to provide a place for the people around in this kind of a quiet courtyard, which is away from the street, just to sit and to have a picnic perhaps. And it's actually today, I don't have slides that show it, but the people in the offices around it, and it's an area which is developing quite intensively in Berlin now, they're using it. It's full in lunchtime. People sitting there, and sometimes they don't even know it's a Holocaust memorial, and they just go there for a sandwich. About a year ago, a theater company from actually London that has some connection to Berlin has asked me if they could use it as a theater. And we were trying to conceive a way how to use this place as a theater. Initially the idea was that people, of course, would sit on the benches, and you've seen on the layout all the benches, all those 500 benches are overlooking an empty part of the square where the Torah cabinet, with some of the altar, was placed. But actually, what we decided eventually is to reverse this hierarchy and actually to put the people in the empty space and let the actors run around those benches and use them as the set. And that created I'm sorry again that I don't have slides of that, but that created incredible sort of depth within that and incredible sort of richness in a way that people were using these very simple elements. Of course, other metaphors somehow started to come as you do that, and we've been hearing before about the graveyard. It was never our intention, but somehow the grass that was growing kind of wildly there makes it look like a kind of an old deserted graveyard where you have the stones kind of picking over that. But it was not, as I say, sometimes you make something and you're surprised by what it suggests back to you, rather than being the origin of the process of the design. Well, this is some images. I wanted to finish because it's a short talk by pointing something that I think is interesting and that I just kind of realized much later after the work was concluded again, especially when we were in the process of having the play organized and authorized, is that this memorial is owned by a company. It's a private memorial. And the story of it is interesting. The Jewish community sold the plot in the 50s. It was remained empty for a long time because somehow the real estate value of a place where a synagogue used to have been they just nobody wanted to buy it, and it was almost like a curse on the spot. And finally, when Barmer Ersatzkasse, which is a sort of a private medical insurance company, bought it, they actually were shying away from the area where the benches were standing. And that was kind of something that triggered the idea that their building is actually running around the perimeter of that. And the commission, the idea to build it, and the maintenance of it is done by a private corporate company. I don't know if there are private Holocaust memorials or synagogue memorials other than that, but I find the idea, and I started to find the idea the more I think about it, fascinating that companies could start having their own memorials, but perhaps private people should have it, etc. So this is what I wanted to conclude with, is those 2 points. That first, an idea of, or an attempt to be generous, to have a seat, use it. The other is about kind of the corporate identity of that place. Thank you.
Okay, the next paper is entitled Representing the Unrepresentable, Developing the Memorial Site of the Former Women's Concentration Camp at Ravensbrck, to be delivered by Stefanie and Philip Oswalt. Philip was introduced yesterday, but just to tell you, Stefanie is a historian and journalist in Berlin. Her main field of research is contemporary German Jewish history and literature. She works for public radio and has developed several exhibitions on contemporary literature and history for the Goethe Institute, as well as others. She was part of the design team on several memorial projects by Oswalt and Tisha. I'd like you to welcome Stefanie Oswalt.
Well, I know. I hope I will manage. Well, yes, thank you very much for letting me speak here. I feel a little strange because I'm not an architect, but I have to explain, I got involved in this project when I was working with the University of Potsdam, and at the time I was doing a lot of video interviews with Holocaust survivors, so I was very much involved with the issue of memory, and it happened that we were friends, so we thought maybe we should get a team together and work on that competition for Ravensbrück. Well, a lot of what I'm saying is going to seem familiar to you because Matthias Reser has talked this morning about Oranienburg and Sachsenhausen. And actually, we're very much connected with that project in terms of, not the project, but the whole idea of concentration camp sites. And so far as it is being situated almost in the very close from one another and has to deal with a lot of similar problems. So I may repeat myself, but I think... Okay, maybe, yeah, okay. There you see where Berlin is situated, and just on top of there is Sachsenhausen. That is what we heard about this morning. On top of that, this is Ravensbrück. This is the site we are talking about. And you see there are those rather big spots. That's basically main concentration camp sites. And the other ones are smaller concentration camps and work camps, which are, of course, connected to the main concentration camps. Well, the concentration camp of Ravensbrück is part of the city of Fürstenberg, which you see on the second slide. A little town with 5,000 inhabitants. Town and the concentration camp are separated by this lake, which is the dark thing over there. So even in the times when the concentration camp existed, it was always visible from the other side of, from the town side, which is the town of Fürstenberg. And the inmates of the camp always walked through the little town, so there was a very close connection through those two sites. When the Nazis left the camp in late April 1945, they burned all documents which sort of describe the site. So what we know nowadays about the site is basically from survivors' memories and from trials such as the Hamburg trial from 1960. And apart from this, there are some photos, and you showed one this morning too, from the British Royal Air Force, from reconnaissance missions, as I was told. And also there was found an SS map. So what we see on that plan that was taken in 1945, maybe I started a little different. Ravensbrück was built in 1938 as a concentration camp for women only, so that makes it a little special. And it's only one of two concentration camps which which was for women. The other one is in Bergen-Belsen. It started not to be an extermination camp. I mean, this is what people very often confuse. Those concentration camps located within the borders of the Reich mostly were not designed as a special extermination camp right from the beginning. So they started already rather early in 1933, as Matthias Reze pointed out this morning. And this one started in 1938 and was basically made for women who were political opponents, communists, so-called asocial women who wouldn't behave according to Nazi rules. So later on, especially when the German army had to retreat from the Eastern Front, also this camp turned into an extermination camp. Yeah. And also, but that was already very well pointed out by you, I think, this morning. It is a camp which also dealt a lot with this idea of extermination through labor. So maybe you had this thing. Is that it? Yeah. Laser. Okay. So this is basically the main campsite, and those barracks here in front of it. You can see barracks. The shape of barracks were built in 1938. Later on, they added basically a textile industry over here. What you see here in front is this is the SS settlement, and maybe we'll talk about that later too. And during the course of the war, the Siemens started a firm there too for the manufacture of weapons, and so that is situated here. And also, here basically. And also in the other bit, on the back here, they constructed in 1942. They constructed another camp, which was is called a youth. The English term is a youth protective custody camp, which was designed for 3,000 women, basically young girls. Basically German girls who were meant to be re-educated there. So, okay, maybe I should give you some impressions of the site here. Here we go. So this is basically the main camp, which you see on the left side, the barracks, mostly for housing in this case. And on the other side you have the entry to the so-called Siemens camp. Okay, this is the SS settlement in sort of Bavarian country house style, and it very much resembles, I think, the design also of the settlements at Sachsenhausen. So more than 130,000 women went through Ravensbrück, and we don't know exactly how many died there, but there are estimations it must be a bit among between 50 and 90,000. Also, Ravensbrück is very well known for its horrible, cruel human experiments in a so-called hospital. So, pretending to do research for the treatment of wounded soldiers, those women were mutilated, and healthy women were sterilized. Okay. After very horrible months at from the beginning of, well, basically from summer 1944 onwards, the camp was freed in 1945, and by the Red Army. And we have a picture from that. On the right side, it's some sort of political manifestation which took place exactly after the liberation of the camp. And on the other side, you see that's basically lorries who bring women back to their home countries. So that was the first layer in history of that site, basically. So, okay. The Red Army occupied the whole area of the site and turned it into a Red Army military camp. Up till 1993, when the last forces had to withdraw from the camp, no German or only very few officials were allowed to enter the site. To give you an impression in numbers, the city of Fürstenberg, there were more than 30,000 Soviet troops stationed, while there were still 5,000 Germans living. The Soviet army completely reshaped the site due to their own needs. And what you see here is, again, it's basically overlaying the SS map and the Soviet map. So the grayish thing is the old Nazi map, and the other ones which are blue actually there is how it was reshaped and overshaped by the Soviet buildings. And they stationed a motorcycle battalion there. The camp barracks were taken down and new buildings were erected. New fences and walls were also built. The site of the former Siemens camp was now transformed into underground tanks for gasoline and military equipment. And the former youth camp, which is this one here, where we had that before, there were embankments erected, and behind that you had garages for tanks and also kind of military lorries. And the former SS settlement was turned into housing for the officers of the Red Army. So the only trace of the former concentration camp was a small memorial along the lake, which had been designed by the so-called Buchenwald Kollektiv, a special GDR institution which created all the national memorials in order to shape it according to the idea of anti-fascistic memorial sites, and to have there those mass manifestations which we talked about this morning also. For example, for the days of Tag der Opfer des Faschismus, which was always in September, so you would have a crowd there. And what we see on this photo is basically the wall of the original part of the original wall of the camp, and there all the nations who had inmates in the camp or who were imprisoned there put their names. And in front, which we can't see so well, here we go. There is a rosary basically, and underneath it's a mass grave. So okay. So in 1993, the Russian army withdrew from the site, and for the first time since World War II, it was possible for the public to enter the site, and also for survivors. Actually, that was part of the very hurting thing, especially to those people. They were never ever allowed to get to the places of their sufferings, and as we know from also the psychology, it is very important for those people to trace where the sufferings were in order to sort of deal with it somehow. So, and it turned out when the Soviet army withdrew, that actually the whole site was not anymore legible at all. So it was not clear what was parts of the former concentration camp site, and it was not clear which layers belonged to which history. So what we see here, for example, one would probably think that this, I don't know, there must be an English word for that, it's a guard tower or something, watchtower. This watchtower would be Nazi or SS building, but in fact it is a Russian watchtower. And also, that also appeals to very many of these fences, etc. Here we go. So that's all. And people who go there don't know, and even the survivors who came back were very often not able to locate their places of sufferings, etc. So, and here we have another one where basically also these huge surfaces were all sealed. Thank you. Okay, maybe this actually I think is flower pots, isn't it? Yeah, very. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, there are some people saying yeah, which I interpret that they know what I'm now talking about. Well, Ravensbrck has become rather famous because of what you're seeing here. Because when the German army, the Soviet army withdrew from the campsite, the city of Fürstenberg did not know what to do with those really gigantic areas that were now empty. Yet they knew that there was a huge international interest in the site. they were still traumatized by the experience they had just after the unification, when they had decided to build a supermarket close to the entrance of the former concentration camp site, and there it is, it really was built. There was so much resistance and international protest, claiming that those East Germans, without any sense of tact or empathy for the victims, would now even build a supermarket on former concentration camp land site. A huge public debate erupted. Fürstenberg was invaded by the media, and very many reports faked the images. So on telly, you had the impression that this one was really built next to the crematory, which in fact, if you see it on a huger scale map, is not true. And one has to know that in the times of when the Soviets sort of occupied this territory, especially there, they were doing all kinds of troop, how do you call this, Manöverübungen. Basically, they were driving along with tanks and all kinds of things. And also, they were not very far from there. They had a little circus event and all. I mean, that was basically not any spot of any interest. So those people were not aware that this would cause so much political struggle. Okay. So, but at least, and one has to say that up till this point, actually the building of the supermarket, which was never used, and for a certain while you had, they had put hospital beds in it just to keep it as some storeroom or something. Up till now, the relationship between the city of Fürstenberg and the memorial site is completely poisoned and destroyed, and people are not interested in the site at all because they still can't understand what happened then. But at least the officials were aware that they wanted to restore or rescue the image of the city, and that they would have to find a solution for the Ravensbrck site. So they initiated a competition in which 80 teams took part, and they didn't give any advice on how to deal with the area, except they said that they did not want any new buildings or superstructures. So before we started the project, we had a couple of presumptions, and I'm going to tell you briefly, and then Philip will explain the thing. Although Ravensbrück is a historical site, it doesn't say anything about the suffering of the persecuted women. Only in the area of the existing memorial there are traces. For example, the crematory, or there's another place, I didn't bring a photo, but it's called the Erschießungsgang. Eventually there were women sent into this place and were shot there. Other traces may exist, but they are silent. The relics from the Nazi period don't tell any story in themselves, but they make it possible to rediscover the locations of the suffering. To make them speak, they need contextualization through photos and documents, all oral and written testimonies of the survivors. The suffering of the victims, the terror of persecution and dehumanization cannot be reconstructed, and that is how we came to the title for the lecture, which is actually refers to Elie Wiesel, who in a film says to speak the unspeakable. And as to this design for the memorial site, we think we can only try. No, as to this design, the site itself can only make evident that any attempt to express what has happened must fail. The only thing possible is to show the size of the camp, the infrastructure, the location of events that took place. Any design that tries to force the visitor into the perspective of a victim, in our opinion, for example, by trying to evoke a feeling of being imprisoned or being isolated, is inadequate, and it's kitsch. It makes the historical event harmless. Moreover, we consider it wrong that in the country of the perpetrators to offer the visitor an identification with the victims. Then the victims of the Holocaust should be memorized and mourned. Ravensbrück is a place of mourning, and that also due to the fact that very many people were killed here and just digged somewhere into the ground. Their bodies were just digged into the ground, and also the ashes. I mean, people were the corpses were burned in the crematory and the ashes were just thrown into the lake. So we also consider Ravensbrück as a cemetery. Ravensbrück too is a place for research and political education, which tells us about the relationship between perpetrators, bystanders and victims. And most of the research has not been done. Any design for Ravensbrück has to have a potential for modification. Historians and designers, and that actually also refers to what you said this morning, I mean the whole thing has to be a process of communication. It can't be true that an architect designs something that's ready. I mean it has to generate, be generated in a process of talking. So historians and designers have different tasks and interests. Historians can very slowly and carefully want to examine the site, while the designer has to present the site to the public. Because of a change in generations and possibilities of memories, and of the memory and mourning will change. Soon there will be nobody alive who has experienced the Holocaust or National Socialism. History will then no longer be transferred by survivors and testimonies, but only through media, through films, text, photos. In this future situation, a historical site will gain a new significance. The materialistic traces of the history become the proof of what has happened. They prove the truthfulness of the testimonies. The image of the site may, together with the media, create even a more emotional approach towards this former place of suffering. And now, you.
Okay, so with this three considerations, we worked then on the design, the three of us, with Stefanie, who's not here. And so here you see an aerial photograph of the place as it was at that time, with the buildings by the Red Army, mostly, and a few remnants of the Nazi time. What we did in the very beginning, kind of just even so the camp also exceeds and has kind of secondary locations in the area around it, and also of more far distance. We made the decision to say, okay, we articulate three main areas, and then the fourth, which is the SS settlement, and the three main areas are basically the three camps for the prisoners, which is what Stefanie explained before. And then we started first to make it understandable, the extension of these sites, by using forestation on the perimeter, so which is not necessarily historic. It's just kind of to make it more clearly readable in space what the spatial extension of these areas has been. So these, you see these three locations. And we developed then different approaches for the three different parts of the camp because of the different condition of the different use at the time and after. Then it was pretty obvious that we decided to keep every historic building from the Nazi time, but different from what Matthias explained today from the Sachsenhausen project, we also saw it as important to leave traces of the use afterwards, which must be somehow balanced. So the problem, as Stefanie has pointed out, that the amount of remnants of the Russian occupation of the site make it unreadable, the spatial situation of the camp. There was a need kind of to remove most of it. But we decided in each area of the site to keep some elements, so which means in the main camp we kept a few of the constructions, garages, which have been kind of in a different pattern than the barrack pattern, so which make it very easily readable that they are from a different time. Here in the Siemens camp, we basically kept the underground tank, which has like openings to the above ground, which makes it also very easily readable. And here in the area of the youth camp, we just proposed to leave the topographic changes, which have been very significant, but to remove all built structures. And so now I want to go through these three main areas. So this is a situation during the competition as it has been in the main camp. And on the right-hand side, you see a photograph of the model, what we have been proposing. Basically, the problem was, I mean, that most given structures have been gone. So the question is how you make it again readable and to make it possible to locate what has happened there. And we didn't wanted to reconstruct anything, but at the same time we saw the need kind of to make the site readable again. So what we proposed was actually to start a process of searching for traces, and that this search for traces in itself would shape the site. Meaning that we propose to start a process for digging for foundations of the barracks, and in doing so, you would happen that you gain in relief a negative footprint of all the barracks. And independent if you find anything or if you don't, you still would have kind of the perimeter of the barracks kind of printed negatively in the ground and would show the plan of the former concentration camp on site. And we also propose that this is a process which should not kind of be a thing just done by state finance and done by a construction company, but to see it more kind of as it already has happened in a small scale before by kind of volunteers, that kind of people who would like to volunteer in this kind of process just would do it. Would mean that this process would take a long time. We assumed at least like 20 years or so, because the extension of the site is rather enormous. And also this would be kind of the possibility to give people, give a younger generation the possibility for an experience with this historic site and this kind of direct confrontation with history, which is not communicated only via media in this time when all the witnesses have been gone. And so the idea was, I'm missing, no, one's back. And then we have also had the desire to make this process visible. And then the idea was very simple, to say we would fill up a hill of cinder in the very beginning of this process. Cinder or cinder? This kind of waste product from steel production. Cinder. So which was actually the material which used to cover the area. So to pile up a hill of cinder which would be sufficient to cover the whole surface. And then you would kind of slowly start the process, and each, if you have finished an area, you would take material from this hill to cover the area, and then the hill would shrink, and until in the end kind of the surface is covered and the hill is gone. And if the kind of the interest in this process is limited, and maybe or for other reasons the process would stop, you would have like a situation like here where you kind of see still an indication of the whole site by the hill. And you see kind of it's a proposal to visualize this process and kind of also to visualize at least for a certain amount of time the unfinishedness of the memorizing of the history. So basically the model is a little bit paradoxically shown the situation of the hill, which is the beginning, and also the final situation of covering the ground with a relief, kind of showing the footprints of the barracks and with maybe some of the foundations which could be found. The other thing is what you also easily see here, that the perimeter of the forestation, which kind of make it, even in these long distances you have there, it especially experience what the form of the and the extension of the site has been. A third element which is also important are these trees, which have been planted already at the camp's time, which have been very, very small, and which the prisoners don't remind. And they actually have been asked that also these trees get removed. But indeed, the trees, of course, are an historic trace of the camp structures, which in our days is very one of the little things which kind of shows the alleys in between the barracks and makes it a little bit readable, the spatial structure of it. So even, I mean, if you go to the question of the authentic or the non-authentic, you can of course argue, and as Matthias did, that this is kind of something we can ask if this is authentic, because I mean the victims haven't experienced that way and even ask that it's removed. And of course, I mean these things change over time. The tree obviously grows enormously, and but still, I mean it's an historic element which makes it readable. So I mean I would not like to get into the discussion of the authentic and non-authentic, but I think I mean it's of very much importance to have this historic elements and to deal with them, because they tell in themselves a story which I mean don't need an interpretation by us as a designer, but kind of offers a possibility for reading by the people going there or researching, and or just kind of as a visitor, and to establish your own reading, which can be very different. And as you know, the interpretation of the Holocaust or also the knowledge of the camp has kind of developed and changed enormously. So the way we see today such a site will differ very much from as it will be seen in 10 or 20 or 50 years' time. And then also we do smaller interventions, which I'm not going to explain now. Then is one also important thing is the relationship to the village. I mean, it was, as Stefanie said, because the prisoners arrived at the train station of the city and have to walk through the city in order to arrive at the camp, and also they work in different locations outside of the camp. So they have been very present. On the other hand, I mean, this is this complicated relationship between the city and the memorial site, and the people in the city always feel kind of punished by this history in a way, and they also raise the question, I mean, are we more guilty than other Germans, for example? And so we didn't want to kind of go with the design into the city and to make any interventions inside the city, but we proposed to clear the waterfront of vegetation to make the camp even more visible than it has been at the time of the camp. So to establish a visual relationship over the lake from the city towards the camp, and this camp wall is still standing. So this would be kind of, it's visible, very visible from the other side. The second site is a Siemens camp, and actually we found it rather readable as it exists today. So we basically didn't propose to do much there, just kind of again this forestation edge in order to understand the size of it and to maintain it and so on. So this is a perspective view of that. And the third site is the site of the youth camp, which also happened to be from 44 on, in parts of it, an excoriation camp. So it was used for where people have been chosen to be killed. And the problem there was that even more than in the main camp areas or in the Siemens camp area, basically almost all traces of the history have been gone. I mean, we have these topographic changes, and these are the garages which have been built by the Red Army. So there was a question, I mean, how to deal with this area. We started also to have a discussion about, I mean, what kind of aesthetic we can use in such a site. And as Stefanie was saying, kind of, we believed in that kind of to try to do something which gives you the impression of being imprisoned, or kind of to take the role of of a victim is for us kind of kitsch, and I think this is something what we could also discuss later on about the Eisenman memorial in Berlin. And so we thought it's in no way possible to give a central impression of what it has meant to be there. It's just kind of possible to give a reading of the site. So if kind of you don't use this kind of aesthetics of depression or kind of then the question is what kind of other aesthetics we use. And then we decided that there's also the possibility to use something which is beautiful. And what is usually used and also used at the site with the ashes being in the lake is kind of using flowers to memorize the dead people. And so we just proposed to have a big blue flower field, which would markate the area of the youth camp. And then we just would keep free the area of the extermination camp, just to keep it open for totally open research. So there would be no formal rule given how you deal with the site, just kind of any kind of historical research, digging for any reminiscence can be taken, and there would be kind of a walkway from where you can kind of look on the site, which will be researched. And okay, here you see the flower field. This was the competition proposal, which, and with that we won in the competition. The situation afterwards was, first, I mean, it was an ideal competition, so it was not the intention of anybody to realize the result of the competition, which is also that the memorial institution only controls, in a way, even doesn't own this part of the whole site. The other parts are also in some kind of public ownership, but the problem is that the Memorial Foundation doesn't have any money, so it doesn't have any money to invest, so it has already kind of big troubles to keep this area and to maintain the former Nazi buildings in the shape that they don't totally deteriorate, but they kind of totally refuse to take responsible for all these other sites like the Siemens area and the youth camp area, because they don't have the money to do anything about it. So this also meant that kind of publicly accessible at that point in time was only kind of the former GDR memorial site and a tiny bit of the main camp over here. And the other parts are fenced and not accessible, which is actually still true today. And so this is kind of a permanent problem, so there's no new money coming in. It's kind of, and this is pretty much so until the mid-run for the next 10, 15 years. And there was only the very strange possibility to get some financing done, actually mainly to restore this Nazi building here, which was a part of this textile industry, which was a combined financing by converting military objects into, again, to things back of economic value. It was part of the ABM-Maßnahmen, the Arbeitsbeschaffungsmaßnahmen, which is the program for against unemployment, which subsidies from the state. And for our part of the work, it was also the kind of free work of the German military. So even so, there is no intention to kind of continue with the overall design. So there was a possibility to do something about this first part, which is over here, which is now under construction with some changes from the competition entry due to the special situation of financing and also to some other reasons. So first of all, the idea with this kind of to initiate this kind of process was impossible. I mean, there was no way in this kind of financing to finance Sindam Hill, which is not doing anything. So the whole thing has to be kind of to allow circulation for the building. This is basically was the rule of the financing. So this is basically what what we have done is Erschließung. What do you say in English? So just to provide access for this building. This is basically what formerly our task has been. So there was not this process. Also, it was not possible to show any foundations which might be found. This was for the reason of conservation of these parts. And okay, so this was what the area which we could cover. We developed another idea also for the presence of the Red Army. The one thing is we could finally convince the memorial institution to keep some of the Red Army buildings which have been gone, like these ones over here. And we even managed to have the first exhibition which shows the Red Army involvement in the site, meaning both the liberation of the camp as well as the use afterwards. We also decided it would be kind of important to not to get rid of the debris which was accumulating by turning down the Red Army buildings, but to just fill them up outside of the camp here in hills, which would give a presence of this former use. Okay, and then this process started in fall last year. So the German military did the turning down of the Russian buildings and filled up the debris on the site. But I mean, it's for some strange legal reasons, this was not possible, the idea, so the debris has to be removed to another place. What also became important part of this process, that kind of doing this site work, a lot of traces have been found in the area, which was of course clear from before we started the process. So we worked together with an archaeologist who was all documenting these things which have been found and which gave new information about the organization of the camp, of the things happening there and so on. And this is him working there and is kind of this kind of testing and looking for possible elements. And even so, we couldn't manage kind of to initiate the process of kind of voluntary digging and so on. And even so, it's kind of also for legal reasons not possible to show the foundations of the barracks. So the design will stay somehow incomplete even for this part of the area. And so what we did then is kind of not to seal the ground. So in the area where the barracks are, there is kind of this plastic sheet in order which is possible to take it out again and to look for the foundations. And so now you see the site in the end of last year. And which was also, I mean, when we have been there recently, by taking all these things away, or most of them, what has been there, it makes them much, the few things which stayed make them much more expressive. So they was telling much more to you when you have been now on the site, because all the things which kind of disturb the reading has been gone, and they make it much more clearly understandable and also told more just by themselves. So this is both before and now during the construction process. So you see still this kind of Red Army construction, also these walkways, the trees from your, and this is kind of now the site under construction. You see the trees which formulated the alleys of the barracks, and then you see starting of pulling out the cinder. Okay, this is the state of the art now. Thanks.
There's going to be, just before we break, a short presentation by Manuel Herz, but he has to, I think, just connect something to the computer. Some of the issues, again, may be taken up in discussion at the end, but in the meantime, are there any questions that could be posed now? Can you say it loud?
Did you say that for legal reasons the foundation could not be exposed?
Yeah, I mean, this is conservatory people. It's a very tricky thing. I mean, it's also partly understandable. The problem is, if they are exposed to the weather, which they didn't used to be, they will deteriorate. And we have the opinion, I mean, it's not the point, I mean, they are not kind of like parts of art history in that they have to be kept in a certain condition. I mean, we wouldn't have such a problem with it, kind of, they would deteriorate a bit. The problem is for conservatives, people kind of, because it's a legal landmark, which has to be preserved, they wouldn't allow to expose them in order to keep them. So they would prefer that they are kept underground, invisible for anybody, but they would still remain as they are.
So this is a rather clear case of Alois Riegel's point about the conflict between Neues-Wert and Altes-Wert here, where one group wants to maintain a monument in immaculate condition, and another is quite happy to recognize the indices of its age.
Okay, this presentation by Manuel Herz is entitled The Light of the Diaspora.
Okay, what I'm going to show you is it's a project, a competition which I won about a year ago, 1.5 years ago, for a Jewish community center in Mainz. One second. I think it just crashed. Sorry. There it is. It's difficult when you work with two monitors where one is very big. Okay. So it's a Jewish community center in Mainz called Meor HaGola, Light of Diaspora. And I will start speaking a bit on Mainz. Mainz, as probably not many people know, is actually sort of one of the most important cities for Judaism as we know it today. This is mostly due to Gershom ben Yehuda, one of the most famous rabbis in Jewish history, who lived around the turn of the millennium, in Mainz, worked from Mainz, and formulated most of the rules and the laws of sort of communal Jewish living, but not only for the Jewish life, but actually a lot of things like the secret of letters, that letters can't be opened by postmen, or the Briefgeheimnis in German, or the rules for divorce can be traced to Gershom ben Yehuda. His wisdom was so great, his knowledge was so vast, that from all over Europe, from Spain, from the whole of the diaspora, questions were sent to Mainz, to Magenza, to be answered by Gershom ben Yehuda, so that this knowledge gave him the nickname of Light of Diaspora, because it gave he himself gave light to the diaspora. He was one of the most important Talmudic scholars, and changed and reinterpreted or reread the Talmud, and he was also the teacher of Rashi, which is another very famous rabbi from that area. And I think this shows one side of Mainz, but a different side of Mainz, and that makes Mainz very sort of maybe very exemplary for a German Jewish city. Is this what is almost very dryly notated here is the population of Jews in Mainz, and with a terrible regularity. You see that every 50 years the whole community of the Jews in Mainz were exterminated, were killed, were burned, were sent to exile. Starting from the year of 900 or 950, when the first Jews came to Mainz, every 50 years they were all killed, and 3 or 4 years later they regained the trust, they regained the faith to go back, to start again a new community, to start again a new Jewish culture, and to rebuild anew the synagogue which had been burned, which had been torn down a few years prior. And I think this makes Mainz very, very special and maybe more extreme than in any other city in Europe, that you have this search for knowledge, the search for wisdom, the search for a certain truth and research and learning, and this incredible catastrophe, this unbelievable tragedy, not only in the Holocaust, but with this bizarre regularity, coupled with a faith, with a belief that still Mainz is the place where Jews should live, where one should re-establish a community, where one should re-establish it's a good place to be. So, being a center for Talmudic research, that is the proposal, that is my scheme. Being, and you've seen that page before today, being a center for Talmudic research and sort of the Talmud, and that is one of my main lines of arguments, the Talmud being a replacement for physical architecture. When the Christians, when it took the Christians 700 years to build the Cologne Cathedral, which is maybe one of the primary examples of Christian architecture, the Jews took 700 years to build the Talmud, to write the Talmud, or even more than 700 years. And it is also architectural in its structure. It has architectural techniques of writing, of arguing, of construction, of layouting, etc. And so a lot of the design methodologies are based on techniques of writing. One of them is one Hebrew word, kadusha, which means a blessing, or to bless, which gives the building its shape. You see here the elevation in model. As an urban scheme, or as an urban design, it picks up sort of the conventional German block structure. It is sited on the site of the previous synagogue before the war, which was destroyed in the Reichspogromnacht, and it picks up that. It picks up that morphology of following the line of the street, and then orientates itself towards the east. This is east. So it recreates somehow this block structure, and thereby also automatically creating two spaces, two public space, one public space and at the entrance, and one more private space, synagogue courtyard. This shows from a distance. Of course, also the morphology of sort of medieval, the Jews' alley in Mainz is picked up in that morphology of the roofs. You see here the medieval roof structure. which gives also the section line through that building. One other guiding idea was the shofar, which is probably the oldest symbol of Judaism. It goes back to Abraham and Isaac, and signifies a certain connection towards God. It establishes a connection of mankind with God. Of course, the call of the shofar brings the congregation together, and is often, or is usually used on New Year's Day, and therefore is also a symbol of hope and looking forward, which is used in the shape of for the shape of the synagogue space. But it's not only symbolic, but it brings the light, the easterly light, symbolically the Jerusalem light, right into the center of the space. In a way, synagogues have a problem always, because they, on the one hand, want to be oriented towards Jerusalem. They want to have a direction, but at the same time, they want to be a centralized space, because when praying, the Torah is taken from the eastern wall into the center of the space, and in a three-quarter circle, the congregation sits around that center and orientates itself towards the center. So it has this, it wants to be both an oriented space and a centralized space, and this the shofar-like volume orientates the building, of course, towards the east, towards Jerusalem, but brings the light into the center and lightens that space from where the Torah is read. It's just shown here in this diagram. Another sort of technique of writing was used to shape the facade. It's a ceramic facade where you see the tiles here. This is roughly 15 centimeters, so it's something that you can grasp. The facade turns into an object, and it creates a pattern. In the two-dimensional. This shows a technical detail. It creates a pattern in the two-dimensional plane of the facade, almost hinting at a third dimension. It creates a perspectival pattern where the windows are sort of the vanishing points of that perspective, and thereby again plays with the dimensionality of Hebrew characters, plays with the dimensionality of that plane of the facade. And here you see one segment of the building. I think the building is the building reacts or projects a certain rising or changing condition of Jews in Germany today. First of all, it does not refer directly to the Holocaust. In my point of view, especially for Mainz, the Holocaust is not the model that the building should be based upon for a future living community center. Mainz has so many other histories, so many other important events that the Holocaust is a bad starting point, is a bad foundation for a new community center. Mainz, in the last 10 years after the wall came down, the Jewish community expanded tremendously. From around 50 families, it has grown to around 250 families. So it quintupled within a time span of 10 years. Most of them have come from the former Soviet Union, and that alone, of course, created tremendous problems. Winning that competition, the city was happy, I was very happy, the community was very happy, and the politicians were happy, so everyone was happy. But of course, very soon the conflict sat in, or the conflict arose, and it started from something very almost benign or stupid. It was the voting procedures for the new head of the Jewish community. Oops, sorry. Which they had to re-establish new voting procedures because the current voting procedures were still based from pre-war times. Now, with a Jewish community where 80% or 90% of the population is recent Russian immigrants, this small detail of who can we vote for and who can we not vote for became extremely political because it redefines, or they had to define their Judaism. Who is Jewish and who is not Jewish, who is allowed to vote and who is not allowed to vote. So a very, very aggressive conflict was triggered, and it on an almost embarrassingly scale that the previous head of the community, a very fine 75-year-old lady, a bucket of water was emptied over her head and she had to go to hospital. Police had to come to like tear away the fighting members of the community. The keys and the locks were changed in the existing praying hall so that part of the community couldn't access it anymore. And that went on for about 9 months. And of course, by the opposition, in order to be in opposition, had to choose one project with which it could argue, with which it could stay in opposition, which was then, of course, that building. That building became then heavily contested. And in last December, the opposition was voted into power. Very fortunately, the new head of the community became now the strongest supporter of that building, switching sides right after having been voted into power. But I think this struggle is very emblematic for the condition of Jewish communities in smaller German cities today. Maybe to end, I want to say that the building is through that influx of Russian Jews, but also through the new generations having been born. Of course, a completely different relationship towards the Holocaust has been established, also through the recent discourses, Walser Debatte, Historikerstreit, allowed a different relationship to the Holocaust, and also maybe before 10 years ago, the Jews in Germany were always very, very guilty and ashamed and fearful of being in Germany. It was a combination of being afraid of another anti-Semitic attack and being ashamed of being in the land where their sisters, their brothers, their fathers, their grandfathers or mothers had been killed. So they stayed in the background. They stayed in the courtyard. They stayed hidden. They didn't want to participate in everyday life, not in the banal or in the normal everyday life. And through the influx of the recent Russian immigrants, that has changed, so that now I think we do have the possibility of being very present in the city life, and that building marks that presence or triggers that presence, and being very visible again, not hiding in the back courtyard, but showing a presence which, of course, also links back to the importance of Mainz, of its previous times, and tries to re-establish an everyday quality of Jewish presence in the city of Mainz. Thank you.
Could we have any kind of questions directly related to the project, or people can leave their observations till the final discussion? Okay, well, before I thank Manuel, I'd like to say that we're going to break now for about 10 minutes, really just to give people an opportunity to maybe have a drink and stretch their legs. because I thought lots of people would probably then go up to the bar and they won't be able to handle it, we've put mineral water and like orange juice in the South jury room, so if people like to help themselves there. Otherwise, I'd like to thank Manuel Herz very much indeed.